Hey, I'm very glad to be here, and thank you for inviting me and the opportunity to speak here. There were a lot of many talks, a few more, but yeah, stay with me. What I will talk today about are not just experiments, but things around them, the context, others, people, articles that led to some of my experiments, things that inspired me, and I will also talk about the outcomes, what will come after experiments usually. The bug reports, the articles themselves, maybe CSS working group issues, and all the other articles that build upon what you build as well. Two things first. First is, this is my experience. I understand that I have maybe a bit too much free time for doing these experiments, so it's not universal, and you don't need to feel bad about not doing some of these experiments and stuff like that. I myself sometimes find myself without spoons to actually do things, and then maybe in a few months I actually go and do a lot of things. So it's like very sporadic. Sometimes I do a lot of things, sometimes not. So yeah. And the second thing is that we need to be always thinking about what we do in terms of accessibility, and we need to experiment responsibly. And whenever you do something, you need to mark it clearly that it is an experiment, and do not say, okay, this is a CSS tip, but then you go some very weird things that might actually not be very supported. And you need to think about browser support, accessibility, how things work. Talk today by Sarah was really great about that. Yeah, there are things in CSS that might actually change how things will be perceived by accessibility tree. So yeah, you need to be mindful. And of course, yeah, think about browser support and all this. Then let me just start with my experiments. I will not talk very deeply about them. I will show some demos, but mostly I will talk about what happened around them. So 2 months ago, I did publish, that's back. So yeah, 2 months ago, I did publish this article, layer toggles, optional CSS mixins. And I will talk about what happened before. Before this, let's travel back in time. And let's start from the beginning, or actually let's begin from the end of the last CSS day. Well, the second day of CSS day, as it's always confusing with this common mistakes and specifications. So after this second day ended, I left to my hotel inspired, because many people, both speakers and attendees, were talking about style queries and how they would want them to be there. Right now, they're available in Chrome. They are in Safari Technology Preview as of recently, and I really hope that in Firefox, after they will finish with add property, they will go to style queries as well, because I think it's kind of a related thing, so it would be really nice. And then, after they did mention all of that, I was thinking, okay, what can I do, what can I experiment with what we have today in order to achieve what we can with style queries, at least in some regards, with some use cases. And I did play with some interesting things. I did play with like named containers. You can name different containers differently, and then toggle the container that you are querying, and like or toggle the container that you are applying in order to trigger different effects. I tried some keyframes. There are different ways you can use keyframes as kind of a map of different properties and then assess different points at different times. But it's not very convenient and not very good to apply always in static animation. Then I also thought about Jaynori and her article about type grinding, where you have a lot of very complicated logic for sure programming, and Jaynori actually does some actual games like ping pong and stuff like that with just CSS using some of the very wild hacks. But yeah, all of that did not really work out, but still there were some interesting things that I wanted to write an article about. So after the next day, before leaving from Amsterdam to Paris, I did write in Mastodon that, yeah, before sleep I had these experiments. And rather quickly, Johannes Odland, who is somewhere here, did reply that, yeah, nice, and did you try the space toggle trick, and mentioned Lea Viru's article. To which I replied, yeah, of course, I know it. And I actually was familiar with it and was thinking about trying it maybe with something similar, but did not yet do this. And this was like a push for me to spend my train ride back from Amsterdam to actually code on this. And yeah, this is what I did. This is an article of cyclic dependency space toggles, which is a technique that allows us to create kind of a short circuit between two properties, two custom properties. I explain in more details how it works in the article itself. It's a bit complicated. Browser developers do not like me because of that, especially browser developer tools, because there's a lot of things going on, and I don't think any browser actually has good support for this in DevTools. But I think it's a very simple API where we define our kind of enum values or like a map, and then use them, and then we can switch just one custom property in order to toggle values. So this is just one part of what I'm talking about. And this is based on space toggles, as Johannes mentioned, which allowed me to implement this. And space toggles, if you don't know, it's basically a technique. Multiple people come up with it at the same time, like in a span of a few years. Anna Tudor, Jane Norrie, David Kurshid, David K. Piano, if you know him by this name, and Lea Viru. So the technique is simple. We could have two states for some CSS custom property: initial value or an empty value, just like a space. And whenever we have an initial value in custom property, if you know, we use the fallback value. But space is a valid value for CSS property, not property, but for a custom property. So we can switch between those, and when it's valid, then it returns nothing. So in this case, our when we set level default becomes invalid because it's short circuit with level, it's cyclic issue, but CSS handles it, making both of them invalid at computed value time. And then the background becomes lavender because level default is initial. But level success, level warning, and error, they all mention level, it's valid because they don't short circuit, and level is initial because it's by itself short circuits. So they result in fallback of a space. And fallback of a space returns to background, making it valid. If all 4 values were applied, it wouldn't be valid because we cannot pass multiple named colors there, but this allows you to do this. So next, with space toggles, this allows us to do this, and I will do not go more into details of how it came to fruition. In this article about cyclic toggles, I provide a timeline of what happened, like what events were there. But one event I want to talk about is, again, Jane Norrie, who did play a lot with custom properties. Like her experiments are very wild, more wild than mine, I would need to say. And she did open this issue in CSS working group about one small aspect about how they work when substituted into other variables, basically what I'm doing with cyclic toggles. Initially, it did not work. Like I think it worked in some browsers or not. There are like history. But this suggestion by her was approved, was spec'd, and then implemented. And implementation went through a few years. Like I think the last browser to fix all the web platform tests for this was Safari in January 2023, so just last year, just a few months after custom cascade layers. So like maybe this is the reason why no one other than me did discover like this technique before. And yeah, so we can kind of consider this newly available if it was in a part of baseline, because yeah, now all browsers support this from beginning of last year, and we can try to experiment with this and try to find out the APIs that we can achieve with it. And yeah, so my initial article that I mentioned that I wrote 2 months ago also uses like some other weird things like custom cascade layer around this, and actually a general selector, so a star selector. You might think that might be a bad idea to apply all of that to this way. We'll see. So this was another event that led me to this article that I did write. Hayden Pickering did ask in Mastodon, of course, some question, kind of related to what I'm talking about, but not really, because we did not find an actual answer. And Nathan Knowler did reply to him, mention this Cyclic toggles article. So yeah, thank you, Nathan. It was not something that helped with Hayden's request, even though I tried to do something, but I did participate in discussion. I played with a bit with code, and I played with one thing that is revert layer in custom cascade layers. And this this CSS-wide keyword, revert layer, was something that I learned from 2 articles. One by the same Nathan Knowler, who did write this great article, So You Want to Encapsulate Your Styles, in which he uses it for some weird things. And second one is by Mayank, where they did talk about very nice use cases for revert layer. And both those articles opened my eyes basically on how useful this keyword is. Like, how can you use it with layers in a way that you cannot prolify it. It's a very new behavior, how it works, and it's very useful. So with all of this combined, I did come up with this layer toggles optional CSS mixins. So what it is, let me show a few examples. Here, we can have some elements, and we just toggle one custom property, and we get applied some styles like border radius, background. Then we go to their parent and toggle just one property, layout, and we get some layout, some small grid. We can change some parameters of it if we want. And we can see how we could apply it as an inline style if we want. And by just applying one custom property, we change the layout that we apply. We can even move later, and already mentioned visually hidden elements skip to content that shows on hover or focus. I mean, focus or active. So we can just apply one custom property, kind of almost native, visually hidden mixin. It just works. Or we can go even higher and apply some resizer, and then we can resize our element because it applies all the necessary properties for this. So we just toggle one property, one custom property, and apply multiple things across multiple elements if we want. Although for multiple elements, we also will need to have a support of style queries because they help us to use things on the children. So I did show 2 things here. One is small CSS grid and small flex from Stephanie Eccles. So already mentioned today, but go there, and there is a lot of very useful snippets. And second thing is a visually hidden mixin that I got from the Ben Myers, where they talk about how we really need this as something native. I know that there are controversial opinions about this in the way that multiple people in the accessibility community think that maybe this is not a good idea, others think that it is a good idea. I think that we need to think about this and make something like this native, just so developers who are copying and pasting code will not make mistakes when doing so, and we could guide them in how they do this. So all of that was possible, like all these mixins, due to at least 2 Mastodon threads, no Twitter threads involved, at least 5 and plus articles, not involving like small CSS and Ben Myers article, 8 and plus persons' experiments and contributions over many years, and of course all the work by CSS working group spec editors and browser engine developers who did implement this and talked about custom properties and did all this work. So next thing that might happen is CSS mixins and functions. A proposal by Miriam Suzanne. I really hope that something will come out of it, and I really hope that browser developers will look at my wild experiments and will try to maybe think about custom native mixins, because I don't think everyone wants to have 10 layers applying to every element on a page, and then you do custom properties and revert layer cascades down through all these layers in order to deliver one property to your target. It might be much more convenient and performant to implement this natively, because we already could do this. I probably write article with many use cases for these mixins to showcase how we really need them. So I implore you to also tell browsers and others that we need native mixins. And this was kind of butterfly effect. Many times when someone shares something or mentions something, it led to some change. whenever you did something, it led to some change. No matter how small the contribution is, it could lead to a useful effect and multiple things combined together and improve things. And you can come up with some technique based on other people's works, and others people techniques like small grid and CSS can make you think of good examples that you can use for your technique. So yeah, there is a lot of things that are interconnected. And this brings me to next question. When is the best opportunity to experiment? This was kind of a bit of an outlier for me in the way that this was something that was present in CSS for years, even though accidentally, when I tried it, it was already changed a bit, so it allowed me to do this. But usually when you experiment, you learn something. Experiment is when you do something that you probably did not do before in order to see, okay, what will happen. And this very often happens when something new is available to try, like new specifications, like new developer versions of browsers that are released. You always can go to changelog, see what is available, and try to go to try this and see what happens, and then report on it. And this is kind of what happened with me when anchor positioning and scroll-driven animations came out. I was looking at almost everything and thinking, okay, is this a use case for anchor positioning, or is this use case for scroll-driven animations? And I might say that with scroll-driven animations, it's almost everything is use case. You can implement a lot of things. I did implement anchor positioning using just scroll-driven animations in some way, but did not publish it because it's bad. But yeah, it's something that was on my mind a lot. And I'm sorry for making this joke, but the name of my talk, Impactful Experimentation, this font is named Impact. So yeah, maybe it's unnecessary. So let's talk about anchor positioning. So I'm really happy that both for anchor positioning and for scroll-driven animations, I had 2 talks right before me that were mentioning it. So thank you, Tab. Thank you, Carmen. So I don't need to go into details what is this anchor positioning. But basically, it was on my radar from, I think, November 2022, when I first heard about the specs for it, and I read them and really wanted to have this. And then later, next year in February, when it was, I saw it in Chrome Canary under feature flag. I don't remember if it was even command line feature flag or not, but basically, as soon as I saw it, I went and tried it. And later, months later, I did publish my anchor positioning article, where I provided a lot of examples. Point about me, I don't like to go the usual way, so I did not try using anchor positioning for all the general use cases like tooltips or popovers. And Tab already mentioned one of the use cases that I provide in this article are side nodes. Maybe still not a good idea to use layout, absolute positioning for layouts. Maybe there is a better way somewhere to do this without anchor positioning, but still it's possible to do it with this. And it's basically whenever I think about what to experiment, I try to go off the beaten path, because it is the path that those who created this specification probably were thinking about. But when you try something new, it's useful to go and see the edge cases, see what the technology at its core allows you to actually do. Because the use cases are just that, use cases. You can think of the technology and what it brings to the table of everything else, how it will interact with every other property, what will happen when you try it with this, what will happen with this. Think about, is this familiar to some other idea that you saw somewhere that you might wanted to implement and experiment on. And when going through, I won't go through all my examples, I will show one part of it, which is connectors between elements. Tab mentioned that, yeah, we can connect an element to 2 different anchors. And this is exactly what happens. We can have 2 points and then have an element between them and do something inside of it. In this case, there are some hacks in order to detect the position of relative position of elements to each other, or of course in CSS. But I hope we will have something like anchor queries or whatever, which will allow us to understand to which area we currently showing or compare anchors between each other. So this allows us to do something like this as well. So instead of a gradient, we can have some background with the SVG image, which very conveniently with the marker allows us to precisely point from one element to another and create this kind of connection. And then we can do things like this, like more practical things. So in this case, we have some nested link lists, like a mind map or some structure, and we can connect elements one to each other like this without any hard-coded coordinates. We just mark elements. Okay, this connects to this connects to this, using idents, and then just, okay, it just works. And this is like also using SVG to draw this line. I think there is a very good article in Stephanie Echo's 12 Days of CSS by I think by Niels. I don't know if he's here, but yeah, I invite you to read it as well. But yeah, there are a lot of practical applications for this. Like in our company, stuff like this is usually done either by a lot of complex SVG overlaid over stuff, or by sometimes drawing canvas over DOM. So like right now with anchor positioning, we could do something like this quite easily, declaratively, without any hard-coded stuff. And when I was experimenting with it at yesterday, Elika said, I felt a lot of issues to CSS working group about anchor positioning. I did, when I published my article, at the same day, I published 7 prepared especially for this issues, so I could link to them in the article. And some of them were really resolved in some way, one way or another. So I hope that my contributions did make the anchor positioning specs a bit better. And this is like important. We need to give feedback early, because in this case, I tried to experiment it as soon as I was able to do it with this prototype. And this allowed to have a bit more impact on what will happen. And now, like a small exclusive demo for CSS Day. There was, other than that, 7 issues. At the same time, I also commented into more, because you need sometimes to go and actually read what other people create, like other issues. So you won't reward the same, do extra work. So there was another issue among those, talking about the transitions between for a transition for inset properties on one element when its position anchor changes. So we say, okay, now we position to this element, but now, okay, no, we don't want to do this, we position to this element. And we want to have transition for the state. So we can do this now in latest Chrome Canary, maybe in regular one, and we can do something like this. So we can have one element, and just for any element, we say, okay, focus visible, or anchor name, something. And then we position this element over any of those elements. And as Tab mentioned, we can have anchor visibility hidden, so this outline will not go like completely outside, but it's still visible outside of anything. It can be in the topmost layer using like position fixed, maybe not in the topmost layer like with popover API, but still, like I think this allows a lot of things to do, like stuff like that is actually inspired by article or more of a small project I saw by Nikita Vasilyev in 2013. He actually created something like this using just by JavaScript, and right now it is possible with anchor positioning. So this brings us to like next point, scroll-driven animations, which is a very different case from anchor positioning for my experiments, in a way that with anchor positioning, I did experiment when they just happened. With scroll-driven animations, I arrived a bit later, when they were already kind of wanted to ship it in Chrome. So there was not as many ways I could contribute to the specs themselves or some things, but I still did a lot of testing and created a lot of Chromium bugs, not created the bugs themselves, but of course reports. And this allowed still to make the finally shipped version a bit better. So again, I will not talk about all my experiments, but I wrote multiple articles about scroll-driven animations. So I mentioned at least one example from each of them. So this was my first article that I wrote, wishes granted by scroll-driven animations. Again, I tried to go off a bit in path, and nothing bad with this. And like the usual use case that I always thought about them is like these promo sites where things move when you scroll. And I think Karma's demos are really good. But I wanted to try something different, like what else we can do when we get this possibility. So first thing that I tried, and spent a lot of time thinking of is like the stack state for sticky element. So we can have sticky elements, and then when they stack, we want to change this. Multiple people wanted this for years, and scroll-driven animations allowed us to do this. I know that there's in the works like a prototype, not in the works, but like a year ago was in the works, just prototyping stack query, kinda in Chrome. But I think this way of doing this is much better, just because we, instead of having a Boolean state between stack and stack, we just use scroll-driven animations as they're intended to, and just adjust things as we scroll. And with sticky positioning, it was one of the things that actually was changing a bit closer to the release, because these changes allows this to be a bit more convenient, because I think when I initially tried to implement this, it was much more convoluted. Now it's a bit more easy to do with scroll-driven animations. Another article that I did publish is position-driven styles. And a funny fact about this, there is no scroll here. We can use scroll-driven animations without scrolling anything and without having to scroll. Why? Because when I don't think it was related to scroll-driven animations, but when I was thinking about overflow property and the difference between its clip and hidden values, I read a bit and then was reminded by something I read in specs for scroll-driven animations. When you do overflow hidden, you still have kinda some scrollable thing inside, like kinda. But it's hidden. But we can do stuff like that. So we can position multiple elements in some container. And here, I do not hardcode any values, anything. We just get the basically coordinates of our element inside our container, and can apply different values based on it. So here, what I do, I apply 2 custom registered properties over x and y axis from 0 to 1, and then based on these values, we can do whatever we want. And it's easy to demonstrate with scroll. Like if we had a scroll, yeah, you can scroll and the values change. So elements transition between the states. But with a static position, yeah, it's just static. And we can use this for multiple purposes. In this article, I provide other use cases. Like we can kind of detect when something wraps, kind of detect position of it on an edge of an element. So yeah, there is a lot of things that can happen. And my final demo for scroll-driven animations is fit-to-width thing. Funny thing, like usually I don't come up with new ideas like right away, like when I wake up. Like a lot of thoughts go into it, but this was one. I just woke up and thought, maybe what if we will do something like this? What if we just use scroll-driven animations and we could have like dynamic, no hard code for any values, fit-to-width text. The way it works, one issue with this, like if we think about typography, we lose this ability to adapt to font size actually, because the way it works. How I achieve this, we can have our container, we make a very big font size for our text inside, which goes long outside of this container. So it's guaranteed to overflow it. Then we can use view timeline to measure what is the proportion, how much it overflows. And then we can apply this as a scroll-driven animation, and then use transform and reverse, change the value, and then basically it automatically shrinks to the value of the width of the container. And it's actually a very simple effect. It might be quite possible to maybe do it a bit better, but maybe we could have something natively about this, but yeah. And when thinking about like all these things, thing to think about is progressive enhancement. And I think with scroll-driven animations in particular, there is a lot of opportunity to do it in this way. Like stack element is just position sticky. If it's stuck, but not without any extra style change, it's okay. With elements on a grid, they still elements on a grid. They could look like normal elements if scroll-driven animations are not available. So you can still do this. And with fit-to-width, you can just render text in the smaller font size, and it's okay if it will wrap. But there is one thing that I want to think more about. I did not have too much time to actually play with it. But basically, graceful ponyfilling. Like ponyfilling is when instead of polyfilling something, when you usually hook into browser APIs and just fake them. Ponyfilling is when you write something around your feature and try to do something that's just over it and not actually touching something. So this, I don't see this talked about much, but I saw this mentioned in this talk by Ryan Townsend, actually on this same stage on Performance Now last year. The idea is that we can have, when we have like some small effect, we don't need to have a complex polyfill to do the thing that it does. In case of this effect with scroll-down animations used to fit to text, with text, the only thing that we need to know is the proportions of a container to the content. And this is what we can do with just like 2 resize observers on the element and on the container, and that's it. And then we can pass this as a custom property, the same that our scroll-down animation would apply otherwise. So we could use most of the same CSS that we have with transforms and everything, but just in one case, when scroll-down animations are available, they will put the value there, and when they are not available, we can use a very small, for example, custom element, a very simple way to do this, and apply this this way. I do not have any demo to share, but maybe this could be a homework for you. It's actually really easy. You can go to my article about fit with text, use custom elements, and then do 2 resize observers and just apply it. And like when I wanted to do this talk, there was a bigger section that I wanted to talk about all the different ways we can fix the CSS is awesome thing. For example, using fit to width, we can fix it this way. And many people thought about like this CSS is awesome meme before, and of course, like CSS Day is awesome as well. And a month ago at ElementyConf, I was surprised when I saw that Miriam actually did talk about a lot of things that I wanted to talk about in her talk, where she talks about how this is inherent property of CSS, how we show that when element is clipped, it's okay. We prioritize the content over like something else. And I wanted like to do some more experiments, but I will show just one more. This is actually can benefit from scroll-down animations, but this example is not done with them. Actually, I need to click once again. So yeah, yeah, we can do something like this. Oh, I fall as far as this awesome board. Let me maybe even play it again, just so. Yeah. So yeah, when we have some idea, when we have something, we do not need it to be unique. Like CSS is awesome is a meme because it's a meme. It's people started to use it, started to print it on teacups, started to think how this can be fixed. Is it a problem? Is it not a problem? For me, it is not a problem. For me, it is a puzzle. And I think many people like Miriam do it as well. Like there are multiple ways CSS can fix things like that. We can approach some element and think, okay, how can we do it differently? And Kevin at the beginning talked about this a lot as well. There are multiple things that we can do, but we can actually try to do further, try to see what other ways we can implement something with. Not everything should be like a unique idea. As I've shown, like many things that I did implement, for example, movable focus, it's something that just some articles that I read somewhere 10 years ago, and then just it stuck with me because it's a cool effect. And now with applying the, okay, is it scroll-down animations, is it position of anchor positioning, I could apply it to this example. And ideas are everywhere. Like 2 things that I try to do. One is to think out of the box and try to find something else. But second thing is just try to look at everything and write down everything. Because otherwise, if I have an idea in my head, I cannot do anything unless I either go and implement it or I actually go and write it down. And I have hundreds and probably thousands of ideas written down. And what writing down your ideas allows you to do is to later connect the dots and see, okay, if you return to some idea multiple times, that means that it might be a good idea. Maybe you could connect some use cases into something singular, and then when new technique arrives, when new specification arrives, you will see, okay, I had this idea, I did not know how we could implement this, but this actually like matches, and as a puzzle piece falls into action. So another thing, like expression of thought, after you got this idea, after you experimented with it, what happens next is to actually go and share it in some way. It could be in any way. Like even if you told someone at your work, you can just mention that, oh, this is an idea, and I just write about it in Mastodon. Or you just share some articles that you liked in response to someone. This is important. And the impact from this can be the bigger, the more things you do this way. Like most ideas are just somewhere in the drawer, but some of them can be really nice, and some of them can result in something. And this is very helpful when you write it down. Like when you write something down, you learn more. Like when you try to write an article, even if it's a detailed one about what you did, you have to express yourself in a different way rather than if you were just to telling it someone or just saying, oh, a cool demo. But even then, like just sharing a demo like on CodePen is okay. Just it's okay. You don't need to write a very thorough article, but it's helpful. I think we need to maximize the impact that the things that we do can do, and that means that we need to try writing articles. We need to try contribute to CSS working group issues. We need to try do more that we do. Even like whenever we can, it's not necessary, but just even the important part is that even small things matter. And the outcomes that we get is really nice. Like whenever you do something and someone mentions it, and then you get a new idea because of that, it's like you helped yourself from the future. It's a really nice feeling. And yeah, it's no matter how big the outcome will be. Like it could be just a push of someone. Like, okay, good job, it's a really nice experiment. It could motivate them. Try to do this more. Try to share articles. Try to attribute people. It's like a thing that I really like to do a lot. And whenever I publish like a list of links in Mastodon, I always mention all the people from Mastodon who are there. And almost always, it's 99% of people I mention are on Mastodon. Just saying, if you are not on Mastodon, like if you are in CSS, why not? Frontend Social by Miriam, there are so many good people. You can find who to follow just by going there and maybe looking who they follow. Like it's very simple. Maybe, yeah, try Mastodon and try to make an impact. Maybe not the font, but yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Roma. That's a lot. There was a moment here where Leo was just aghast. Fantastic. When you play around at the limits of the CSS spec, how do you ensure that what you are doing works across browsers? What are you doing to check?
I open them and check, but yeah, also with a lot of experience, you at some point start to understand, okay, what are places you need to check. So you usually know what might go on, but yeah, it's always useful to go and check what happens. Sometimes you might encounter some bugs that you did not encounter before. Like whenever you go into edge cases, and you know that it's an edge case, usually it's useful to check in other browsers, because sometimes like a technique you encounter could just not work somewhere else. I think I had recently a technique that related to style queries that I did check and implement in Safari Technology Preview, but when I checked it in Chrome it did not work. So I filled an issue for style queries in Chrome, and now it's fixed.
Yeah, excellent. I think, how do you get started filing issues, either with a working group or with browsers? And how do you know when to put something in? I'm just going to load on questions. How do you know when to put something, file it against the working group or against a browser?
the best way is to read the specs. It helps in both cases. Like whenever you encounter some issue, sometimes it might be not a bug but a feature. Very often it happens, like especially with CSS, with the vast amount of things it contains. So I think whenever you encounter something, the best way, first you can go to MDN, and then for this property or value, and then go to the link to the specs. It's always one click away from MDN. It's the easiest way for me to find places in specs. Yeah, and by doing this, you read the specs. CSS specs are really good written. Like if you compare it with HTML or JavaScript specs, you wouldn't want to do anything other than CSS, really. So yeah, when you read CSS specs, usually you have all the things you need. Sometimes you need to go through some links and gather information, and then you can understand, okay, is it something that is not yet covered use case? In this case, you go probably to CSS working group and ask things. Also, you can always write in Mastodon with CSS hashtag. There are so many helpful people there that monitor it and subscribe to it and can respond to any questions there. And then, if you think that it's a browser issue, usually if it's a sign of if it's a browser issue, if it's both browsers claim support for it, and then in one of them something happens. And then sometimes you can go to web platform tests and check if there is an existing case for this. So look for the property that you are looking for, like especially for the new one, and see if there are already tests that are there. You can even contribute to web platform tests, even though for this you need to read a bit of how to set everything up, but it's a good thing, like you can contribute to your tests, and yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, great. A comment for you from Alan Stearns, the chair of the working group. He didn't mind any of your quotation marks, so good work on that front. He says, you mentioned at one point timing your experiments and not filing issues for scroll animations because it was shipping. He wants to encourage everyone to still file issues, even if something is shipping. So that improving old things is useful too, not just improving the new things. I really loved your comment. It's not a problem, it's a puzzle. I think that's all that we have time for now. Roma and Carmen are going to be upstairs. We're going to be taking another break. Let me see here. Thank you, Roma. Yeah.